Hello, YouTube community. It's Robert S., and welcome back to RobScure Music. In today's video, I'm actually going to talk about something that's been on my mind, and I'm sure on a lot of people's minds lately, and that is the unfortunate deaths of so many musicians, actors, celebrities that we grew up with and that we've come to know so well. And the most recent of which is Cindy Williams, who of course played Shirley in the show Laverne and Shirley, which was a spinoff of the TV show Happy Days. And if you remember Shirley and how effervescent she was and her bubbly personality, obviously, people who grew up around the same time as me, people of my generation, I think it's particularly difficult for us because, if you think about it, like the generation before us, they certainly had their music, they had, their entertainers, their actors, and so on. But particularly when it comes to music, they were listening to big bands. They were listening to, Les Brown and his band of renown. They knew Les Brown, but for the most part, they didn't know the band members. Tommy Dorsey, who else? Benny Goodman, Count Basie. Even if they watched Lawrence Welk on TV, they didn't know the individual band members. And then when we were growing up, it may have initially started that way. You knew Buddy Holly, for example, but you may not have known the other band members. Same with Elvis Presley. He stood out, and then everybody else is in the background. And then the Beatles came along, and everybody knew John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And everybody could name the band members. They could name the band members of the Rolling Stones. They knew The Who. They knew, who else? The Byrds. They knew, obviously, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Led Zeppelin. So we kind of grew up with more of a connection to these individuals that made up the band. And we followed their progress within a band. We followed them perhaps when they went to other bands. And we really had more of a connection to these people than our parents did. And I think the same is true with some of the entertainers and the actors. Whereas the medium in the past may have been more movies, where you occasionally went to a movie and saw people, we had television shows coming into our living room or in our kitchen or wherever you watched your TV. And, we grew up with these shows and we got to know these actors so well. So when you hear about deaths like Cindy Williams, Lisa Marie Presley, Jeff Beck, David Crosby, who else? Lisa Loring, who was the original Wednesday in the Addams Family, Christine McVie, of course, Jerry Lee Lewis, and so many others. I can go on, but the point is that, we had this connection. So now all these years later, when these people are in their 70s and 80s, and in some cases more, it's just an unfortunate and sad truth that we're going to witness their passings. So, I was thinking about this, and, one thing led to another, and I started thinking about the 27 Club, if you will, and the 27 Club is essentially, a group of primarily musicians that passed away at age 27. And I think, the 27 Club could include actors, entertainers, other artists. But for the most part, I think people tend to think in terms of the musicians who passed away at age 27. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of those artists who coincidentally passed away for various reasons at age 27. And in fact, I pulled out this magazine, which is a Life magazine called Gone Too Soon, the 27 Club, Rock Icons Who Died Too Young. And this is from 2016, I believe. But, you know, they're highlighting basically 6 people, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them, but, you know, you got Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, Amy Winehouse, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Brian Jones. And, you know, let's start with Brian Jones. I think he was actually the first of this group to pass away. Brian Jones basically, you know, grew up in the UK, and, you know, he grew up actually as a child. He had a very normal childhood. He was actually a very well-behaved child. He did well in school. His parents had high hopes for him. And then he became a teenager, a somewhat rebellious teenager at that. And I think it was at age 16, he got his girlfriend, who may have been 15 or somewhere around there. I think he got her pregnant. They arranged to put the baby up for adoption so that the parents of the babies, who were kids themselves, could finish out school. Well, they basically, Brian's parents shipped him off to London, I guess it was, in hopes that he would be an optometrist. Can you imagine Brian Jones as an optometrist? But things didn't really go that way, and he ended up discovering music and women, and he formed a band, and I think it was called Blues Inc. initially, and then later he changed the name to the Rolling Stones, basically after a Muddy Waters song. And he essentially was the initial leader of the band, and he had no problem telling people that. But as any, you know, large personality, he started to have some problems. You know, he got into drugs. He was having quarrels with people, not the least of which were the other band members. And, you know, he lived a somewhat high-risk life, as quite frankly, all of these people, or at least the ones I'll discuss, the first 6 anyway, I think they all lived a high-risk lifestyle. But unfortunately, on July 3rd, which is actually my birthday, July 3rd, 1969, Brian Jones was found drowned in his pool. So, you know, he had unfortunately passed away too soon, but he was pretty much getting kicked out of the Stones anyway. But who knows what may have happened for him in the future. But we'll never know, unfortunately. But back in 1967, he actually attended the Monterey Pop Festival, and he had the opportunity to introduce a new artist who went on to make a name for himself at Monterey and subsequent festivals. And that was a musician by the name of Jimi Hendrix. And Jimi Hendrix is the second person we'll talk about in the 27 Club. And Jimi, obviously, amazing guitarist. He was born in the U.S., I believe in Seattle, or at least in the Washington, state of Washington, in that area. And he grew up, and basically, he had moved to the UK, and it was in the UK where he actually found success with his music. And his first 3 singles actually became, I believe they were top 10 hits, certainly top 40 hits. And that was Hey Joe, Purple Haze, and The Wind Cries Mary. 3 excellent Jimi Hendrix songs. And it wasn't until he came over to the U.S. and played at the Monterey Pop Festival that he suddenly made a name for himself in the U.S. And, you know, the rest is history. He went on to give us some really, truly amazing performances, some truly amazing albums. Not enough. But his third and final album, which is Electric Ladyland, that actually peaked at #1 in the U.S. So, you know, he's, like I said, he was a big hit here. He also obviously headlined at Woodstock and at the Isle of Wight Festival. But unfortunately, he died of a drug overdose on September 18th, 1970. And, you know, again, very unfortunate. And then there was another artist who made a name for herself at Monterey Pop Festival, and she was also new, and that is Janis Joplin. Actually, maybe I should show some of the pictures here. We've got, you know, obviously a famous picture of Jimi Hendrix. I mentioned Brian Jones before. Let's see, I can find him here. Bear with me a moment. And now we'll discuss Janis Joplin. So Janis, like I said, she grew up in Arthur, Texas, and she was never really a child that fit in. She always felt like she looked different, acted different, pretty much couldn't wait, I guess, to get out of her town. And, you know, she discovered the music scene and, you know, went to California and you know, really enjoyed, I guess, the rock and roll lifestyle. You know, she's obviously went to Woodstock as well and gave it a you know, incredible performance there and sort of solidified her standing as, you know, rock idol. And unfortunately, she only gave us, what was it, 4 albums? I think 4 albums before she passed. Well, actually 3. I guess one of them was released after she died, but she had been working on it. But her first 2 albums were with the, I think it was the first 2, were with Big Brother and the Holding Company. And eventually she left, and she was really the lead singer of Big Brother and the Holding Company initially. And she left the that band and formed the Cosmic Blues Band, and then eventually had the Full Tilt Boogie Band. And if there's anyone who lived life full tilt boogie, it was definitely Janis. But anyway, so she was basically working on her album, which was called Pearl, and like I said, was released after she passed away. But she was working on that around September, October '69, and then unfortunately, she too, like Jimi Hendrix, died of a drug overdose. In her case, I think it was heroin. I don't remember. It may have been for Jimi as well. But she died of a drug overdose on October 4th, 1970. So just a short time after Jimi passed away on September 18th. And then around that time, when she, like I said, she was working on her album and she passed away in October. In the meantime, another band was working on what would become their final album with Jim Morrison. That group, of course, is The Doors. That album is L.A. Woman. And Jim Morrison, again, gone too soon. But basically, they recorded the album, and shortly afterwards, Jim Morrison actually had gone to Paris, France, and he met his girlfriend there, and I guess she was renting an apartment. And it was while he was there that we got word that he passed away. And apparently he was found in a bathtub, and he died by the way, on July 3rd, my birthday, 1971. So when he passed away in France, apparently it was not a law that you had to do an autopsy, and the word was that he had some sort of cardiac issue or heart issue that caused his death. Some witnesses claim that it was drug related, but we never really got official word on that. In a short span of time, from September 70 to July of 71, unfortunately, we lost Jimmy, Janice, and Jim Morrison. But fortunately, it would be another 23 years before we would lose another bigger than life, if you will, rock star. And that member of the 27 Club is, and I didn't get the page ready in the book, sorry. Oops, nope, oh, well, here. Kurt Cobain of Nirvana. And again, somebody who lived a somewhat high-risk lifestyle, but he also had some issues growing up. I think his parents had divorced, and I think that played a major role in some of the, let's call it mental issues he may have had. And I think he suffered from depression. And, he had pressure in his professional life and pressure in his personal life. And I won't get into it. I think you all know the story of Kurt and Courtney and everything that went on. But, he basically broke onto the scene with Nirvana and was one of the main groups, if not the main group, that brought us grunge. And, while grunge sort of, hit the charts quickly and sort of came down rather quickly, all within maybe 5 or 6 years, it was quite a peak that he reached. And everybody knew Kurt Cobain and everybody knew Nirvana. And like I said, he did struggle with some depression. He struggled with heroin addiction. Don't do drugs, kids. And I think it really just became a little bit too much for him to bear. And then unfortunately, his end would come at his own hand via a shotgun wound, if you will, to his head on April 5th, 1994. And then, so that's 5. And the 6th one, and the person, like I said, that they highlight here, Amy Winehouse. And I mean, if you're like me, you probably know these 5 much better than, Amy Winehouse. But, I didn't really get into Amy and collect her albums and stuff, but certainly I think everybody knew the song Rehab. And she was a unique artist, for sure. And, it's unfortunate that she's on this list, a member of the 27 Club, but she was a very expressive artist. Her music was basically It was rock, R&B. It was blues, jazz, and she had a unique style basically, and she was a singer songwriter. So she wrote her own material, and her first album, which was called Frank, that I think that was a critical success, but I don't think it was until her second album, her follow up, which was called Back to Black, where she became sort of an overnight success, if you will. And that album, of course, included the hit Rehab. And she also won a couple Grammy Awards as a result of that. And, she was basically going on to, international success. And she launched her own record label, which she had called Lioness Records. And, things were sort of looking up for her. And unfortunately, though, like the other members in this group, she struggled with substance abuse and depression, I believe. And, her substance that she abused was alcohol. And she actually ended up dying of alcohol poisoning on July 23rd, 2011? Let me just double check this. Yes, July 23rd, 2011. Sorry about that. Like I said, I don't know her quite as well. But anyway, so those are the first six, perhaps the most iconic members of the club, but there are so many more, and honestly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention at least just a few of them. And one individual who I think many people, once this idea of a 27 club came to be, people started looking back in time to see, well, who else was a musician that passed away at age 27? And one of the earliest was a blues guitarist named Robert Johnson. And Robert Johnson, it's said, had a deal with the devil, basically. He had always wanted to be a musician. He wanted to be a good guitarist. So the story goes that one day, or one evening, I should say, at midnight, he was at a crossroad. Well, he was either at a crossroads near the what's it called? Dockery, I think it was, plantation in Mississippi, or he was at a graveyard around that area in Mississippi. But either way, supposedly he's there at midnight. He has his guitar, and the devil, in the shape of another, Robert Johnson was a black man living in Mississippi, and in the form of another larger black man, shows up and takes the guitar from Robert Johnson, tunes it, plays a couple songs on it, gives it back to Robert Johnson, and suddenly he can play the guitar. In any event, whatever you might believe, he ended up passing away from unknown causes at age 27. And then you have, much later than that, Ron Pigpen McKernan, who was a founding member of the Grateful Dead. He was a singer, a keyboardist, and unlike some of the other members of the Grateful Dead, he wasn't as into the drug scene, but he did enjoy his whiskey. And so much so that by the early 70s, 71, I believe, 72, somewhere around there, it became problematic. And it started to affect his health. And his doctors basically said, you need to stop. You need to stop, playing in a band and touring and this lifestyle, basically, that's sort of driving this alcohol addiction and substance, alcohol abuse. And he did that for a while, but then he went back to touring and joined the group. And he was eventually found dead of gastrointestinal hemorrhage. And that was on March 8th, 1973. And then the third person that I want to talk about is Pete Ham. And Pete Ham was a founding member of the group Badfinger. And if you know Badfinger at all, you're probably familiar with their hit songs, Day After Day, No Matter What. But anyway, he was a guitarist, he played keyboard, lead singer, basically, one of the singers, I guess, for the group, for Badfinger. But as much as they had things going for them initially, I mean, they had the support of the Beatles. Paul McCartney wrote Come and Get It for them, another big hit for the group. George Harrison was all over in terms of playing, instruments, producing for them. They were on the Apple record label, which the Beatles had created. So things were looking up. Unfortunately, they had the wrong manager. And he essentially took everything they had in terms of their finances. And then there was a string of, after a string of singles and successes, there was a string of problems. And, the band had issues. They obviously had managerial issues. Apple folded in 1973, so they needed to find a new record label. They basically had a lot of legal and management problems going on. And, Pete Ham had bought this mansion in the UK, and he was trying to, and all the band members were trying to reach their manager to find out what was going on, find out, where their money was, and so on. And Pete felt enormous pressure. You had this string of hits, and suddenly it sort of dries up. You've got to change record labels. There's so much going on. His managers seemingly vanished. And then on April 23rd, I think it was, of 1975, he gets a call basically saying the money is gone. They're broke. And it hits him hard, and he and fellow band member Tom Evans, they go out drinking, drown your sorrows, if you will. And unfortunately, the next morning, Pete Ham is found dead in his studio, which was in his garage, but he basically hung himself from the pressures. And coincidentally, Tom Evans, the band member that he had drinks with the night before, would, several years later, also hang himself. But he wasn't 27. Pete Ham was. So Pete's in the 27 club. And then the final person, I guess I should mention, is, wasn't a musician, but certainly had ties to musicians and to music. And that's Benjamin Keough. And I think it's pronounced Keough. And if you don't know the name, you'll certainly know his mom, and you'll certainly know his grandfather. Benjamin was the son of Lisa Marie Presley and the grandson of Elvis Presley. And, you know, like some of the others before him in this 27 club, he took his own life. And that was, don't remember exactly what year. It was recent. I want to say it was in 2020, like sometime in the summer, July maybe of 2020. And he was 27 years old. So that's it. I hope I didn't depress everybody with this video, but it's been on my mind. I just wanted to do what I thought would be a quick video, and turns out it was not. But if you stuck around this long, thank you. But in any event, stay well, friends. Remember, life is precious. Life is too short. Handle it with care. And if the music strikes a chord, let it play.